Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to this week's episode of my UFC Fight Prediction podcast. This week we've got UFC Fight Night Bautista versus Vinicius Oliveira. But before we get into that, we're going to take a quick look at last week's UFC 325 event. Just sort of go over everything that happened very briefly before we get into this week's picks, because we got 13 fights in the Apex this week. Some of the fights I don't have that much to talk about. There's a couple women's fights that are kind of, not really something that a sharp bettor would ever place their money on. Not that women's fights are bad, but, some of these low-level women's fights, they're just impossible to pick sometimes. So, real quick, gonna take a look. We got Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez as the co-main event, or as the main event. Absolutely awesome event. Volk, I scored it 4-1. I gave Volk 1, 3, 4, and 5. Gave Lopez round 2. Lopez broke both feet in the fight on some nasty checks by Volkanovski. And this paid us last week. If you tailed me last week, if you took the parlay of Alexander Volkanovski, Mauricio Rufy, and Jonathan Mikhailov, you made $135 off of a $25 bet. So a nice little payday there. That was the one bet that did hit last week. We'll talk about Mauricio Rufy real quick for a second. He looks like prime Connor in there, like right now. He looks absolutely insane. Was literally flowing on the feet. Just looked incredible. First round, totally read him out. Read him like a book. Round 2, just, made his reads, landed an absolutely massive strike, and then followed it up with a good 45-second straight. So nasty ground and pound. Ended up, getting Fiziev to basically just fall down once Fiziev got back on his feet. And that was the end of that fight. The BSD Hooker fight, that was an interesting one for sure. I don't think anybody really expected BSD to knock out Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker's a guy who's notoriously known for going to war, but the God of War got the best of him. BSD got him into full mount. I needed that sub decision. If you tailed that parlay, we needed the sub decision as the last leg for $75 last week. Of course, after having him in an arm triangle for a good 45 seconds, he switches to, full mount and then just absolutely unloads like a sequence of a good 45 elbows and punches. And Herb Dean, I believe, was the ref. He was forced to stop the fight. I mean, it was a good stoppage. Dan was literally going nowhere. There was only like 15 seconds left in the round, so I guess maybe he could have given the benefit of the doubt to Dan and let him go back out there for a third round, but we would have been lucky if the doctor wouldn't have stopped it with how much blood Dan had coming down his face. So, Taliesin Teixeira versus Tai Tuivasa was an absolutely horrible fight. Teixeira's first time in his entire career getting out of the first round. By the third round, he looked like he literally just wanted to walk away. Tai Tuivasa was blocking punches with his face. Ridiculous fight. I'm an idiot for ever placing any of my hard-earned money on Tai Tuivasa, but that's a mistake we won't make again, and it was more for the culture than anything else. Sauki looked disgusting. Really nice choke over Malarkey. He hit him with like a suplex when they were standing. Slammed Malarkey on his head. That was really gross. Tafa looked like he took a step forward in that first round. Then in the second round, the grappling showed, and Elikano was able to get the sub. Rouston looked solid. Brundage looked okay at first, but Rouston turned it on. The Torres-Finney read, I don't know if this was a bad read on my end or if this was just there was something wrong going into this fight, but Finney just didn't look like himself at all. I mean, if you would have told me that Torres-Finney would go out there and try to block punches with his freaking face and, do absolutely no wrestling whatsoever, I would have called you a crazy man, but I suppose maybe there was a little bit of stuff going on behind the scenes there. I don't even know what to say about that read. I mean, Torres-Finney's literally shot 10, 15 plus takedowns in basically every single fight he's had as a professional. Just completely abandoned that in the fight against Malkoun and got beat up pretty badly. He looked like he was hurt, like he maybe had a torn ACL or something like that for the majority of the fight. Kept bouncing on one leg, holding his knee. At the end of the fight, he was limping back to his corner. So, bad read on my end. Won't happen again. Yes, it will, but Mikhailov versus Oban Elliott was a pretty good fight. Oban honestly looked really sharp. Mikhailov didn't look sharp at all, to be completely honest with you, at least on the feet. But he hits really hard. He hit Oban with some sort of overhand that broke Oban's orbital in two places. And apparently that just sort of blinded Oban, and then he tried to rush in, close the distance after that, was pretty easily taken down, and then Mikhailov got the submission and put Oban out cold. Oban did not tap, so respect for that, put on an interesting performance, but Mikhailov did get the win, was a big part of the parlay that brought us some profit this past week, so that was big. And I'm not even going to get started on the Kuniev versus Yisat fight because that was absolutely atrocious, like literally so bad. Yisat literally won. I mean, I think it was closer to being a 30-26 for Yisat than it was a 29-28 for Kuniev. I think, I would reckon he was closer to winning 1 10-9, 2 10-8, and 3 10-9 more than Offley winning rounds 1 and 3. Majority decision for Offley is literally absurd. One of the worst decisions I've seen in a while. But, that'll be it for that. I probably talked a little bit too long about UFC 325 there. But, important. Was a great event. Wanted to break it down a little bit. So now we will get into the good stuff, what you guys are here for, and that is the picks and predictions for this week's fight night. Mario Bautista versus Vinicius Oliveira. Starting us off, the early prelim opener, Priscilla Cachoeira versus Claudia Saigula. Don't put your money on this. That's the first thing I have to say. 81% of people are on Saigula. She's 10 years younger. I think that's the best thing she has going for her in this fight. It's a crazy. I don't have the exact stat pulled up in front of me, but when there's a 10-year plus age gap between fighters, the younger fighter wins at a drastic rate. Like, it's literally absurd. It's something over 75%, I believe. So this is a fight that I'm really not going to be able to break down much for you guys. They're both 5'7". Saigula is going to have a 4-inch reach advantage on her. She's coming off of a win over Irina Alexeyeva, who I actually thought was pretty solid. And I picked her in that last fight, but she looked terrible. Saigula was able to just get her wrestling going and win some points on the scorecard, shake out the decision. Priscilla, on the other hand, coming off of a knockout loss to Jocelyn Edwards, who I rank pretty highly. I think Jocelyn Edwards is actually really good. Before that, beat Josiane Nunez, and then 2 fights before that was a loss by Darce to Jasmine Jasudavicius, and a submission loss by armbar to Miranda Maverick. So, the competition definitely favors the side of Priscilla. She's fought a lot more people. Jocelyn Edwards, Miranda Maverick, Jasmine, these are all pretty highly ranked women's fighters at 135 pounds. She definitely has the advantage in the experience category. But like I said, 10 years older, reach disadvantage. Saigula seems like, a potential young prospect at this weight class. I'm going to have to lean with Saigula. Maybe I'll put $5 on a women's parlay this week, in which case I would take Saigula just to win by money line. Looking like she's minus 135 here. And then on the best fight odds, looks like we're finding her at about minus 160, minus 148 to minus 160 range. So she's a little bit wider than it says here on the Tapology website. I think that makes sense just because of the age gap. I'll probably be picking her, but who knows? Most of these fights should just be set at minus 110, because a lot of these early prelim fights are pretty much a coin toss. Just like our next one right here, which is Muin Gaffarov versus Jacob Wiklax. This is an interesting fight, and I've kind of been torn on this one all day, just sort of going back and forth. I talked to some friends about this last night. It looks like 80% of the Tapology community is on the side of Wiklax. I don't know how to feel. He's coming off a split decision win against Patchy Mix that I personally think he lost, and I really do not rank Patchy Mix highly whatsoever. I think he's legitimately a bad fighter. I think the memes, there's a reason that all those memes are coming out about Patchy Mix, because he looked horrible in the UFC octagon. He's already cut and moving on to taking fights in Rizin, I believe. So, interesting thing here. Gaffarov, right here, it says that Wiklax is the minus 120 favorite, Gaffarov minus 115. That doesn't really make sense. So they have it basically set at a coin flip. UFC Best Fight Odds has this fight leaning towards Gaffarov now. Basically every book on Best Fight Odds has Wiklax between plus 105 and plus 110. And I think that makes sense. I think I would personally put him as the underdog in this fight as well. Gafarov's coming off of a pretty solid win against Rinya Nakamura, who I think is actually a pretty solid fighter. Both of these guys are 29 years old. Wicklax is going to have the height and reach advantage, but in his last fight, he just didn't really look sharp in any of his departments. The striking definitely did not look good. That's sort of what a lot of people thought he was going to be bringing to 135 pounds, was solid striking from Octagon, which is, the fight promotion that he was fighting in before. But it ended up not really working out that way at all. He didn't look good on the feet against Patchy Mix. If you can't, look a step above yourself against Patchy Mix, you probably aren't going to against a guy who definitely has really strong takedowns and good offensive grappling like Gafarov. So I'm going to lean with Gafarov here. 80% of the community on an underdog, that's pretty insane. Kind of reminds me of last week with Torres Finney. I think it was something ridiculous like that. That much of the community was on Finney. He came out. He looked horrible. I think this may be another situation of that where Wicklax is probably a little bit inflated here with hype coming off of a win against Patchy Mix in his UFC debut. But, I reckon he did lose that fight. And I think if that fight wouldn't have been shaken out to him on the scorecards, these odds would definitely be a little bit wider for Gafarov. He'd probably be closer to the minus 160, minus 170 range. So I'm going to lean with Gafarov to win this one by decision. Moving on to the next fight of the card, we got Wang Kong versus Eduarda Moura. Again, another one that don't put your money on it. Kong's going to come in probably around minus 225 is what it says here. That'll probably inflate a little bit. She likes to wear, the Joker face paint in the fight meetups before the week starts and stuff like that. She'll get on the scale with her Joker face paint on. I will never forget her being, basically a minus 900 favorite in her second fight in the UFC. And she just got absolutely fraud checked. Like, it was ridiculous. In fact, I'm going to check the fight odds real quick. This is loading pretty slowly, but I have to look at this real quick because it's too bad not to address. Minus 950 in her fight against Gabrielle Fernandez, where she, looked like she's never grappled a day in her life. That may be a problem for her again here against Moura. Brazilian women's fighters always pretty solid on the grappling aspect. Kong is a Muay Thai fighter, pretty famously had fights with Valentina Shevchenko back in the day. This is a fight where Kong definitely has the advantages on the feet, and if she can keep it on the feet, she'll likely shake this one out on the scorecards. If Moura can take her down, Kong has a really tough time getting up. She, puts herself into vulnerable positions for submissions. And, that could be an area where Moura wins this fight. I'm not going to break that down for any longer. That's basically all I have. Both of these women are the exact same height with the same reach. This is coming in at 125 pounds. Kong's the slightly older fighter, 2 years older at 33 years old. I'm going to lean with Wang Kong money line here. If you think, that she's going to get grappled pretty heavily, and you like the side of Moura, I wouldn't talk you down for too long, to be completely honest with you. This is not a fight I'm very confident in whatsoever, but if I had to pick one, Kong actually does have pretty good striking on the feet. She's looked solid in the past. Won her UFC debut by knockout, which was, it was a pretty solid knockout too, if you want to look that up, because women's MMA finishes are pretty rare, so when you see a good one, you remember it and you respect it, and it certainly earned my respect, and she has bounced back with 2 nice wins since that horrific loss as a minus 950 favorite. So, gonna lean with Kong here. Be cautious. She's minus 225. She was minus 950, and she lost a couple fights ago. So, keep an eye out on that. But moving on, next fight, we got Saeed Nurmagomedov versus Habib Basharat. This is a really interesting one. Basharat is I believe, let me check this real quick. Basharat is a minus 135 favorite on the best fight odds, with Said Nurmagomedov coming in between plus 110 and plus 115. I think Nurmagomedov is going to win this fight. I think he's had a tough shake in his last couple of bouts. Lost to Jonathan Martinez almost 3 years ago now, which, you'd like to see more activity from a guy. I think he may have dealt with some injury issues. So, Jonathan Martinez, that's, honestly not a bad loss. Jonathan Martinez is really good. He's got some of the best leg kicks in the entire UFC. Then you got Vinicius Oliveira, who I think is like really, really, really solid. I personally, think this is definitely the toughest test for him, which we'll break down later in his career, or later in this video, but this is the toughest test for him in his career so far against Mario Bautista. And then you got, the Bryce Mitchell fight in his last fight where Mitchell was moving down to 135 pounds, I believe, for the first time in his career. And it was a really close, honestly, pretty back and forth fight between Said and Bryce. So I'm going to lean with Said Nurmagomedov to get this one done, just for the fact that he's been fighting, solid fighters in his last couple of bouts, and they've been close fights. Like, he had a close fight with Vinicius Oliveira, almost had him submitted at one point. Same with Bryce Mitchell, was fighting with the strong grappling side, where he was able to get a lot of his wrestling going and throw up a lot of submission threats. And I think that's going to be a big problem here for Javid Basharat. Basharat obviously coming off of one of the most brutal knockout losses of all year last year to Ricky Simone. Simone landed a disgusting overhand right and put Basharat out cold. He was looking up, on the mat, just sort of staring up at the sky. It was bad. It was an ugly, ugly fight. Basharat's going to be the slightly taller fighter here with the slight reach disadvantage. I think that Said can bounce back here and get a nice win. The Basharat brothers fighting on the same card here. A lot of people are probably going to think a parlay of the two of them. I think Said's going to be the one to bust that. Honestly, I think they both might lose, to be completely honest with you. I may have a parlay at the end of the video where I direct fade the Basharat brothers as my underdog parlay of the week. Excuse me. I'm going to lean with Said Nurmagomedov here. The guillotines, the ninja chokes, they're incredible. And I think that's probably going to be how he wins this fight if he shakes this one out. I think he's going to be able to get Javid Basharat in a position where, he gets him in a tight guillotine, and Basharat's just going to have a lot of trouble getting out of it. So I'm going to lean with Said Nurmagomedov, and I'm going to move on. I'm sorry if you can hear that noise out there. It's ridiculously loud. I'm shooting this video at a community college near me. And they're doing a class in the other room, and they're playing like orchestra music as loud as they possibly can, of course, right when I'm doing this video. So shout out to them. But moving on. Sorry, quick crash out there. We got Bruna Brazil versus Ketlin Souza. This is another fight where I'm going to have a pretty quick breakdown here. I'm going to lean with Ketlin Souza on this fight. Another one of those situations where her last 5 fights don't really tell the full story at 2-3. Lost, via submission to Karine Silva, who I think is pretty solid. Has been fighting with the Fighting Nerds. Then she got a nice win against Marta Kaman and Yasmin Girgao. And then split decision loss to Angela Hill, where she 100% won that fight. I remember that being one of the bigger robberies of last year. And then a split decision loss to Piera Rodriguez a couple months ago. When you see back-to-back split decisions, I love to go with a fighter because that's just such a frustrating thing for a fighter to go through. Have 2 fights, 2 full camps where you're fighting this whole time, and one judge gives it to you, but the other 2 don't. It's got to be really frustrating, and I think this fight she's going to have a lot more urgency to get this one done on the scorecards against Bruna Brazil. Brazil is pretty solid. She's 3-2 in her last 5 with wins over Shauna Bannon, Molly McCann, and Shi Ming, I should say, in her last fight. And her 2 losses are to Luma Lukboom and Wang Kong. So, she's been fighting some of the more highly ranked women's prospects these last couple of years. She is fighting with the Fighting Nerds, which honestly, I guess I did read something about that recently, but I didn't really know that much about that. Looks like 76% of the community is on the side of Brazil. I think this fight is actually, it's completely flipped. So here it says that Brazil's the -140 favorite with Souza at +105. On best fight odds, if you look at the books right now, Souza's floating at about minus 160, whereas Brazil's floating at around plus 125 to plus 135. So I think this is one of those fights where I'm going to agree with the odds makers here. I'm going to lean with Ketlin Souza to have a little bit more urgency in this fight and get this one done. But that's basically all I'll have on that one. Like I said, maybe I'll throw together a women's parlay. But aside from that, I'm going to be very, very light on the women's bets this week. Moving on up the card, we got Nikolay Veretennikov versus Nico Price. This one, I believe, was just announced this morning. This is a really strange one because I think the original fight was supposed to be here. I'm going to back out of this real quick and check this out. The original fight was supposed to be Eric Nolan versus Jose Henrique Souza, and then Nolan withdrew, and then they rebooked it as Souza versus Veretennikov, and then Souza just withdrew, and so they just now this morning booked this as Nico Price versus Veretennikov, which is pretty funny because this fight started with two completely different guys, and then it ended up right here. I do not rank Veretennikov highly. I'm going to put that out there first. But I think Nico Price is at the end of his career. And I think he's going to lose this one. I think Veretennikov is, got a win over Francisco Prado. Very, 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 very controversial win there. I scored that fight for Prado. I think the majority of people did. I know Verdict posted something about it shortly after the fight was concluded, where they said, that the majority of their audience picked Prado as the winner in that fight. Aside from that, his fights in the UFC have been a loss to Punahele Soriano, a loss to Austin Vanderford, and a split decision loss to Danny Barlow. So, the guys who he's fighting outside, the guy who he's fighting in the octagon are not that bad. Going up against some guys that are right outside breaking in, as a welterweight prospect. He's only a couple months younger than Nico Price, which is pretty crazy because it feels like Price has been in the UFC for a really long time. He's going to have the height advantage in this fight, but a tiny bit of a reach disadvantage to Nico Price. Price 1-4 in his last 5 losses to Phil Rowe, Robbie Lawler, and Lawler's, I believe, retirement fight. Yeah, it was 100% Robbie's retirement fight 2 years, 6 months ago, where I believe Nico was a pretty big favorite in that fight, and Robbie put it on him, which is awesome. Obviously, see a guy go out on top. Then he beat Alex Morono, who also fights on this card, and then since then lost to Timba Garimbo and Jacoby Smith, most recently in his last fight. I don't know what the odds makers have this one set yet. It literally just got made, a couple hours ago, just now posted on Tapology, so I'm going to lean with Veretennikov. If for some reason Nico Price opens up as some big favorite in this, maybe I'll reassess that and post something about that on the Instagram account. As for now, I'm going to lean with Veretennikov, but this is another fight that I'd stay pretty clear from. I keep saying that, I feel like, but we're going to get to some value, I promise you guys. Just some of these early prelims, they're just not worth, the volatility. The coin flip aspect of a lot of these are not really worth it. So moving on to Alex Morono, the guy who I just talked about, versus Danil Donchenko. This is going to be a very, very quick breakdown for me. Danil Donchenko is going to win this one by knockout, probably the first or the second round, if Morono is lucky enough to make it to round 2. This dude is straight violence. He's one of my favorite prospects in the whole UFC, a guy who I've really, really been looking forward to. Since watching him on The Ultimate Fighter. 4 months ago, nasty KO win. Won The Ultimate Fighter, got to lift up the trophy. Now, I guess you could consider this his first sort of real UFC fight outside of The Ultimate Fighter show. And I think they're just throwing him a super easy win here in Alex Morono. This is a guy who used to have a little bit of hype behind him, used to be, a guy who can beat some solid prospects, but this is not one of those situations. 0-3 in his last 3 fights, knocked out by Carlos Leal, split decision loss to D-Rod, and then a unanimous decision loss to Nico Price. His last win was over Court McGee, who was pretty awful, and lost a UD to Joaquin Buckley 2 years, 3 months ago. So 1-4 in his last 5. Another one of those examples of fights where the fighters are going to be a 10-plus year age gap, with Donchenko coming in at almost exactly 11 years younger than Morono. I am going to lock in Donchenko by KO here. I think that's going to be likely at minus odds, but that's for a reason. He's definitely going to get the KO here. I feel very confident about this pick, and I'm going to move up the card to Dustin Jacoby versus Julius Walker. This is the main card opener. So this fight I think was originally supposed to be Uran Saltibadiev versus Julius Walker, but Saltibadiev had to pull out, and Dustin Jacoby picked up the phone, which I think, I'm gonna have to fade my mentality for the last couple fights here and go with Dustin Jacoby. Despite Jacoby being 11 years older in this fight, he's actually looked really sharp in his last two bouts. I got to see him win an absolutely disgusting knockout performance win over Vitor Petrino in UFC Tampa last year. Got to see that in person, which was super badass. And then most recently, a couple months ago, he left hooked Bruno Lopez. He's looked sharp in the last couple fights. His last two losses were to Dominic Reyes and Alonzo Minifield, who are guys who have been, floating around the top 15 for the last couple of years. And, beat Kennedy and Chukwu 2 years, 5 months ago. So 3-2 in his last 5. Julius Walker, on the other hand, 1-1 in the UFC, lost to Minifield in his UFC debut, pretty controversial fight, and then beat Rafael Cerqueira via unanimous decision in his last fight. Wasn't able to put Cerqueira away, which is pretty crazy considering Cerqueira has kind of been finished by basically everybody who's fought him in the UFC aside from Julius Walker. So I'm going to lean with the Hanyak here. I think Dustin Jacoby's going to get this one done. I think he could really land a knockout strike in this fight too. Walker is going to be a little bit bigger here at 6'4" with a 78-inch reach. He's about an inch taller with a 2-inch reach advantage. He is fighting out of Springfield, Missouri, so a little bit more of a local product for me, but not close enough to St. Louis for me to consider myself, rooting for Julius Walker. So I'm going to lean with Dustin Jacoby here. I think Jacoby will either win this one by knockout or by decision. He is almost 38 years old. I was just talking to you guys in this video about how, that age gap, it's usually pretty bad, but at the end of the day, 1/4 of the fighters, 10 plus years older are still winning. So I think this is going to be one of those situations where the older man turns back the clock and puts on a vintage performance. So moving up the main card, we got Gene Matsumoto versus Farid Basharat. So sort of hinted at this a little bit earlier. I think I'm going to fade the Basharat brothers in this card. I think my underdog parlay for this video is going to be Gene Matsumoto and Said Nurmagomedov. Matsumoto, 26-year-old prospect. He's had a nice little run inside the UFC. Won his Contender Series fight 2 years, 4 months ago now. Since then, 3-1 inside the octagon with a submission over Dan Argueta. Unanimous decision win over Brad Katona, a win in his most recent fight over Miles Johns, and a split decision loss to Rob Font in a really, really close fight, honestly. I believe at one of the Noche events last year, about a year ago. So, Basharat, undefeated fighter, 14-0, 5-0 in his last 5, all inside the octagon with wins over Damon Blackshear, Cledson Rodriguez, Taylor Lapulus, Victor Hugo, and Chris Gutierrez. Farid is definitely better than Javid, pretty significantly better than Javid. But Matsumoto is a prospect that I really like, that I feel pretty strongly about. And I don't agree with the odds here. It says that Matsumoto's plus 180 here on Tapology, but when you look at the bet odds, it's actually closer to a plus 215 to 225 underdog, and I think there's tons of value there for Gene Matsumoto. So I'm going to take Gene Matsumoto here. He's the younger fighter, slightly smaller, 2-inch height disadvantage, same with, about a 2.5-inch reach disadvantage. But I don't think that's going to matter too much. I think he's going to fight with a lot of urgency here, and he's going to put on one of the best performances that he's had inside the octagon. 17-1, only lost to Rob Font, whereas Farid Basharat hasn't really fought a Rob Font of the world yet. I know Blackshear's pretty solid. Lapulus, honestly, really good outside of the UFC now with the PFL. But, I believe that Matsumoto has honestly, despite being the younger fighter, fought a little bit of a better crowd in his first couple fights in the UFC. And for that, I'm going to have to lean with Gene Matsumoto here to either win this fight by submission or by decision. Moving up the card, we've got Mikhail Oleksiejczuk versus Marc-Andre Barriault. This is an awesome fight, honestly. Oleksiejczuk started training with the Fighting Nerds 2 fights ago. Won both of those fights since training with the Nerds. 2-3 in his last 5, but the losses are coming to Michel Pereira, who was honestly really hyped at the time. Kevin Holland, we all know Kevin Holland's a tricky guy. Shara Bullet, and then since then, 2 big wins over Cedric Dumas and Gerald Meerschaert in his most recent fight, where he looked, like the strongest he's looked in his entire career. So I'm going to have to go with Oleksiejczuk here. Barriault 1-4 in his last 5. Losses to Shara Magomedov, Dustin Stoltzfus, Joe Pfeiffer, and Chris Curtis, with his only win coming over Bruno Silva, who, he did put out Bruno Silva pretty violently. Silva had to get, stretchered out of the octagon. It was a pretty ugly fight. He does train with Killcliff, but he's older in this fight. He's going to be about 5 years older than Oleksiejczuk in this fight. They got the same reach advantage, and I think that, Oleksiejczuk, he's just a better striker on the feet. Marc-Andre throws with a lot of power, but doesn't have the technicality that Oleksiejczuk has gained from striking with the Nerds for these last couple years, training with guys like Carlos Prates, Mauricio Ruffi. These are dudes who are going to lift your game to the next level. And, I think the 95% of the Tapology community being on the side of Oleksiejczuk makes a lot of sense, with, 90% of people picking him to win this fight by knockout. Will I personally be throwing money on the knockout? I'm probably going to stay away from that. I'm going to lean, more towards money line, even though it is a bit inflated. It says minus 290 here. I think it's closer to minus 350. It's looking like he is, minus 350 on basically all the books, between 350 and 360. So, a little bit of an inflated money line, sure. But I do think there's a reason behind that. I think he's going to run through Barriault here and, really put on a performance that reminds people he's moving forward in his career. He's only 30 years old, about to be 31. And I think if he can continue to put together a string of a couple wins and keep training with the Fighting Nerds, he's going to step up and be a legit prospect at 185 pounds here in a couple years. So I like Oleksiejczuk, and I'm definitely going to lean with him. Moving up the card, we got Jailton Almeida versus Rizvan Kuniev. This is a super, super interesting fight. Kuniev coming off of a loss in his UFC debut to Curtis Blades. I believe both of them got hurt in that fight, so it was kind of an ugly fight. Almeida, on the other hand, has been kind of a top 5 heavyweight for the last, year and a half, 2 years. 3-2 in his last 5 with wins over Derek Lewis, Alexander Romanov, and Sergey Spivak, and his only losses coming to Curtis Blades in a fight where he was pretty dominantly winning until Blades was able to land some hammer fists during a takedown attempt. And most recently a split decision loss to Alexander Volkov, which he most definitely won. He, had control time for damn near 10 minutes in that fight. But the UFC felt like Volkov was robbed against Cyril Gane, so they had to give him his own robbery win back. I believe that type of stuff is genuinely rigged sometimes, and I think this is an example of that, where Jailton Almeida got the short end of the stick here because the UFC was just trying to get Volkov back in the win column because they so clearly robbed him against Cyril Gane, and Gane was awarded with an unfair title shot. So, with all that being said, Jailton Almeida is going to win this fight. Kuniev, maybe a Dagestan Russia wrestler, but at the end of the day, Almeida's had probably some of the best wrestling I've seen at 265. He's a bit of a more lean heavyweight when he's in there. His latest fight weight was 237 pounds, so almost 30 pounds underneath the weight limit, whereas Kuniev is a bigger guy. His most recent fight, he fought at 264.5 pounds, so just a half pound under the weight limit. This is definitely going to be an interesting one. Almeida has 3-inch reach advantage. Kuniev has, an inch in height on him. Does Kuniev likely have a little bit of better striking? Sure, but I think Almeida really is worlds ahead of him in the wrestling grappling department. And I think control time is going to be a big factor in this fight, and I think that's going to be the reason that Jailton Almeida gets this one done. He's one of my favorite picks on the card in terms of value, and I'm going to have to lean with Almeida to get this one done and move on. I don't necessarily think this should be a Apex event. I think this is honestly probably one of the better heavyweight fights we've seen. Outside of the top, 3 guys over the last year, I think this is a pretty exciting and fun fight. I think Almeida's going to get this one done. I wouldn't have put this one in the Apex personally. Moving on to the co-main event, we got Amir Albazi versus Kyoji Horiguchi. Now this is a super, super fun one. 94% of the Tapology community is on Horiguchi. I'm going to agree with him there. Horiguchi looked incredible in his comeback to the UFC after a super long gap outside of the UFC and risen. This is a guy who is 35-5, 40 professional fights, coming off, a return to the UFC where he beat Tagir Ulanbekov by submission after literally beating him up for 2 full rounds. And then in his time with Rizin, he had great fights against guys like Sergio Pettis, Kai Asakura. Obviously, back in the day, had some great fights with Demetrius Johnson, Mighty Mouse. So, this is a guy who's been in there with the best of them. Trains with Alexandre Pantoja at American Top Team. He's taken on Amir Albazi, who is coming off of, first big loss inside the octagon, inside the UFC against Brandon Moreno. Before that, had a couple nice wins in a row with Kai Kara France, Alessandro Costa, Francisco Figueiredo, and Zalgas Zumagulov. I think that Albazi is solid. I think he's going to bounce back and get a nice win here, but I get a nice win in the future, but not in this fight. I think Horiguchi is going to be able to sort of have his way here with Albazi. Albazi's going to have a reach advantage, but both of these guys are coming in at 5'5". Neither one should have trouble making 125 pounds. Albazi, pretty notoriously known for, pulling out of a lot of fights, having a lot of injuries. And I think Horiguchi's going to be able to expose that. I think he's much better on the feet. He's a really, really solid grappler. And point style, I think Horiguchi's just got everything it takes to potentially get a fight with Joshua Vaughn or Alexandre Pantoja after the Vaughn-Pantoja rematch happens. And Pantoja inevitably beats Vaughn because a freak injury doesn't happen like last time. So I think Horiguchi could be one of the next guys in line for the 125-pound belt, at least to compete for it. I think him versus Pantoja would be an absolutely amazing event that they could sell very much. Two teammates taking each other on at the highest scale. So I'm going to lean with Horiguchi here. I really like him. Odds are definitely going to be a little inflated, close to minus 300, minus 400 range. But I think there's valid reasoning behind that, and I think Horiguchi's going to get this one done. So moving on to the main event, we got Mario Bautista versus Vinicius Oliveira, and God, this has been one that I have been thinking about for a couple of days now. I've really been split on this fight. You look at the side of Vinicius Oliveira. This is a guy who fights with straight violence at 135 pounds. Pretty big guy for 135, 5'9", probably closer to 5'10". Looks a little bit bigger inside the octagon. 70.5 inch reach. 5-0 in his last 5 fights. Won his Contender Series fight. Then he's been 4-0 inside the UFC octagon with a flying knee win over Bernardo Sapage, which is, if you haven't seen it, one of the cooler KOs at 135 pounds. UFC history. It's really nasty. Then got a really nice unanimous decision win over Ricky Simone, who's a guy who can grapple really strongly. This is a dude who beat Merab Dvalishvili back in the day, putting on a strong grappling, performance. Just coming off of a nasty knockout win against Javid Basharat in his last fight. Ricky Simone is a tough, tricky opponent. Then he beat Said Nurmagomedov by unanimous decision, and most recently in his last fight 6 months ago, had his toughest challenge yet. Had his toughest challenge yet, and beat Kyler Phillips in a fight where, I gotta say, the first round really, really looked strongly for Kyler Phillips, and then Oliveira just sort of flipped the switch. He turned it on for the last 2 rounds, won on the cards. After dropping the first round, I believe every judge scored a 29-28. And I think, for valid reason, he lost the first round, got his reads clearly, and then the next 2 rounds just looked so much better in defending the grappling, so much better in the striking department. Now, on the other hand, he's taken on a guy who's been notoriously one of the trickier opponents inside the UFC octagon at 135 pounds for the last couple of years. Mario Bautista was on a very nice win streak with wins over guys like Damon Blackshear, Ricky Simone, who we were just talking about, Jose Aldo, and Patchy Mix, before he ran into Umar Nurmagomedov in his last fight just 3 months ago. Lost the unanimous decision to Umar. A lot of people bet on him. He was a pretty big underdog, probably plus 400, plus 450 range against Umar. For good reason. Obviously, Umar, one of the best prospects at 135 pounds, just been running through people aside from Merab Dvalishvili. So, I'm so split on this. 60% of the crowd is on Bautista, 40% is on Oliveira. Bautista's close to, minus 200, minus 210 favorite on the MMA fight odds that got him floating between minus 185 and minus 205, whereas Oliveira's floating between plus 150 and plus 165. This has been a hard one, a really hard one for me to pick, but I'm going to have to lean with my head here, not my heart, and pick Mario Bautista in this fight. I think Mario Bautista is one of those guys who does absolutely everything right inside of the octagon. He's a super smart fighter. He does whatever it takes to win. He may not be the flashiest guy, like Vinicius Oliveira definitely is, super flashy, super exciting striker. But Mario Bautista is a very smart guy. He's got great fight IQ, and he does the necessary things to win fights. Even had Umar Nurmagomedov hurt in their last fight. I think he's going to be able to show us a glimpse of what Kyler Phillips did, but at a stronger full fight level. I think he's going to be able to push the wrestling pace, get Vinicius Oliveira up against the cage, which is where Bautista really is his strongest, when he's able to hold an opponent against the cage and potentially get him down on the ground. And aside from that, I think his striking's actually looked pretty solid in the last couple of fights, especially against Patchy Mix. He made Patchy Mix look like a punching bag, just landing strikes on his face constantly. So, I think the wrestling's always been there. He's a strong grappler, got good jiu-jitsu, and I think the striking has improved with time. I think Oliveira is a dog. I think he's going to be a guy who's going to be a solid prospect in this division at 135 pounds, and I think he's going to bounce back with some wins. But I don't reckon he shakes this one out. I think, in a 5-round event, I'm going to have to lean with Mario Bautista here. This is Vinicius Oliveira's first look at 5 rounds. Bautista just has more experience inside the UFC octagon, and has fought, a higher caliber of opponents. And I think for that reason, I'm going to have to lean with Mario Bautista. My heart does want to lean with Oliveira because of how solid the striking is, how exciting he is as a fighter. But my head is really just telling me Bautista's going to get this one done. So I'm going to lean with Bautista. And now let's get into the fight parlays of the week. So we got, I got a couple ones in mind right now. First, we're going to start with my favorite 3-leg parlay of the week. And that's going to be Kyoji Horiguchi, Jailton Almeida, and Danil Donchenko to win this fight by knockout or submission. So I'm going to take that just by finish, just in case anything, strange happens with Donchenko. I think he knocks him out, but I'm going to take the double chance just to be safe. That's my favorite 3 picks of the week. And then aside from that, I'm going to go with a parlay of Mario Bautista, Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, and Dustin Jacoby. So 2 3-leg parlays this week. Go ahead and throw as much on those as you would like. And then we're going to throw 2 separate parlays as well. An underdog lay where we're going to fade the Basharat brothers. We're going to go with Gene Matsumoto and Saeed Nurmagomedov. And then aside from that, I think we're just going to parlay our other picks. Parlay, just a small lay of Claudio Sagula, Muin Gafarov, Wang Kong, Ketlin Souza. I think that covers all the boxes. That puts a little bit of stake into every single fight. Those are my parlays of the week. I'll flash those up on screen. If I decide to do some sort of play with Mario Bautista, I'll probably put that up on my Instagram story this week. That's what I'm going to start doing going forward. Just put up all my picks on my Instagram story. For the people that can't sit down and watch a full-length video like this, that way, if you follow the Instagram account, you can still get the picks every week. You can still tail. Make sure you show some love and support to this video. Last week's video was a little bit down in terms of views and likes and comments and stuff like that. So if you're seeing this, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like, left a comment, subscribed if you haven't already. Make sure you follow the Instagram account. It's just Andrew Sachs MMA, just like this page name is. I'll be posting, whenever I make a video on there, I'm going to start posting my picks on my Instagram story every week. Little fight summaries, fight recaps as they happen. Just going to be more active on that because I think that's going to be a great opportunity to sort of grow this whole thing. So thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. I will be back. I'm not sure when the next fight is. I'm pretty sure we may have a gap. We do not fight again until the 21st. So no fights next week on Valentine's Day. Next week's Mardi Gras. So I'm going to be out in St. Louis for Mardi Gras anyway, which is awesome. I won't have to worry about any fights happening while I'm out drinking in Soulard, so that's great. But next video, no video next week. Next video we'll be breaking down will be Sean Strickland versus Fluffy Hernandez. Banger fight, UFC Houston. Going to be an awesome card. Much better than this Apex event, that's for sure. Got fights like Spivak Delija, Ige Costa, Leal Njukwani, Jeff Neal, Medic. Couple awesome fights on there. So looking forward to breaking that down. Again, leave some love, leave some support, subscribe if you haven't. Really appreciate it if you sat around and watched this whole video. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you guys.